Well, good evening. Today we've got another video lesson. I'm currently in Wichita, Kansas this week with some of our teens. We're participating in Wichita Work Camp, which basically is we're painting houses in the Wichita area, and it's hosted by the Northside Church of Christ there in Wichita. And so today we got a video lesson. And so you should have gotten today's quiz that reviewed last week's material. And the answers are there on the bottom if you didn't see that, and so you can check yourself that way. And also, the yellow box will be back up here, or it should be up there by now, up at the front. And so if you have any comments or questions, you can write those on a piece of paper, put them in the box, and then next week we'll address those. And also, if you don't mind putting your name on those pieces of paper, just that way I know who wrote it, and so if there's a question, I have a question about what you said, or if I can't read your writing. That way I know who to go to. And so if you will do that for me, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, so last week we talked about the lament psalms, and we said laments were complaints to God about a situation, and that they also included a petition to God for deliverance. And so we said that they were that the psalmist or the author was in some kind of troubling situation, and they were lamenting about it or complaining about it, and they were taking it before God, and then they were petitioning to God for some kind of deliverance, for Him to deliver them out of the situation. But the main part of a lament is not so much the complaint or the petition, but instead it was that that lament psalms closed with the psalmist showing their faith and trust in God. They closed with the psalmist giving praise to God. And so we said all of the psalms as a whole move in this direction of praise. And that was kind of obvious to see with the praise psalms. You know, obviously they're going to talk about praise. But in the laments, we talked about how we have this person who is in this very dark place, and they are lamenting about their situation, and they're petitioning to God for deliverance. And then they show this trust in God. It's this turning towards God in those dark situations. And so instead of turning inward or basically going deeper and deeper into this dark place, instead they turn towards God. They look to God for help. And so they look to God for help in this situation. And they're putting their trust in God and giving praise to Him. And I think this is a good reminder for all of us that we never walk alone, that God is walking with us, and in reality, He's walking before us even. And so this was the outline for the Lament Psalms. It started off with the address or invocation, and so we talked about how it's just a simple address to, O Lord. And then we had the complaint or lament. And then you had the description of the crisis in variety, and there were basically three people involved. There was the psalmist, the sufferer, there was God, who they were lamenting and petitioning to, and then there was the they, or the enemy. And then we had a petition, which was a look to or a call to God for salvation, for Him to bring them out of this difficult situation. And then 4 and 5, we have the main point of the lament, which is this confession of trust or vow of praise to God. That in this dark place, like we said, in this dark place, they are calling out to God, and they are putting their trust and showing their trust in God. And so tonight, we're going to look at another type of psalm, which are imprecatory psalms. And imprecatory psalms are actually very similar to the lament psalms. And as we dive into them, I think you'll see the similarities. And when we look at the outline, you'll see the similarities between lament and imprecatory. And in fact, most of the imprecatory psalms are also considered lament psalms. And you'll see that as we get into that. And so let's begin talking about imprecatory psalms. Well, imprecatory comes from the word imprecate, which means to call down evil or cursings upon. And so it's this idea of cursing language. And so they're psalms of cursings. Now, this isn't cursings as in four-letter words, but instead as if you were to curse someone. And so what we'll see is the psalmists, they've got their enemies. They've got the person who's accusing them or attacking them, and they are calling down cursings upon them. They are wanting God, they're calling down evil things or evil things to occur to them and cursings to take place upon them. And so typically in these psalms, like I said, the psalmist is calling for God to curse their enemies. And so they've been wronged in some way and they want punishment for them. And so you can see how these are also lament psalms. The psalmist or author is wronged in some way, and they will lament about their situation, and then that will turn into cursing or calling upon cursings for them or punishment for them. So seeking God to punish the one who has wronged them. And so when we look at these imprecatory psalms, it's easy to be conflicted between this whole idea of how can these psalms, they call for vengeance, how can they be reconciled with Jesus' command for us as New Testament Christians to love our enemies? How do you reconcile the two? How do you say, well, Christ calls us to love our enemies, but here in the Psalms, this is not loving our enemies. And we're going to look at some of the Psalms that it's very hateful and very mean and evil things are said. And so how do you reconcile the two? How do you make the two mix? How do you say, well, okay, how can both of those two things be in the Bible? And so there's a number of ways to approach this dilemma. One approach recognizes that these are very authentic human emotions, meaning these are people in these very real, troubling situations, and these are their natural reactions. This is the psalmist who is human, and humans are sinful beings. And so it's this whole natural reaction that, it's just this very difficult situation and just emotions are outpouring from that. And so it's just a natural outpouring. Another one is, that is another way to reconcile is, that's Old Testament theology. That's Old Testament ethics and are therefore inappropriate for Christians today. That was Old Testament. We're now New Testament Christians. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't take into account that some of these Psalms are actually quoted in the New Testament. And so the New Testament quotes these Psalms. And so to say that that's Old Testament, it doesn't apply to us, doesn't quite give them justice and doesn't account for that they're quoted in the New Testament. And then the third approach is that this is a prophetic pronouncement on what will happen to the enemy in the future, that as the evildoer, this is what will happen to them. And so it's the idea of the kind of almost, we would think of it kind of as a final judgment, or this is God's judgment on the person. And probably the best way to approach this dilemma of reconciling the two is to blend all three, to kind of, take aspects of all three, and there's parts of them that, really, I think, reconcile this idea or this dilemma that we have. And so, remember, these Psalms are poetry. We said these are Psalms, emotions before God. And so, poetry has emotion in it. And so, it's expected that as we read these, and really all Psalms, there's emotion. And it's not always the happy, excited, joyful emotion. Life is full of happy moments, but it's also full of very sad, maybe depressing and just frustrating moments. And so as part of these, these are Psalms that are written by man. And so just, part of that emotion is going to come out. Also, one other thing is in Eastern cultures, this is obviously the the Israelites, they're part of the Eastern culture. And so in Eastern cultures, emotions are recognized as genuine when they are presented in the extreme. And so if you think of funerals, especially in Eastern culture, that you have the wailers, or families would bring in people to solely wail out loud and cry out at funerals. And it's this whole idea that emotions are at their best when they are to the extreme, or they are viewed as authentic and real when they are put to that extreme. And so these harsh statements that we have in these Psalms are spoken in hyperbole or exaggeration in order to drive home their point. And so it's to really emphasize their point, that just their frustration towards their enemy and really towards their situation. And so remember, these words are spoken by someone in extreme pain. And so these are the natural emotions of one in these situations. Also, many of these Psalms call on the Lord to take vengeance on someone. It's not personal vengeance. And so we're going to look at a Psalm here in a little while, and it's calling on God to take to take vengeance on the person. It's not so much the psalmist seeking vengeance or the psalmist taking personal vengeance, but instead it's asking for God to seek vengeance. And so it's about letting God have the final word, which as Christians, we know the context of that as in the final judgment. God has the last say. And so we see God taking his vengeance on the one who lives an evil life. And so it's not so much us taking vengeance or us harming someone or us taking it into our own hands and dealing with it, but instead it's letting God be in control, letting God have the situation. And so how do we use these Psalms? These Psalms with such extreme language. How do we use these Psalms? And I think what we see with these Psalms are emotions that we all experience at some point in our life. We might have these strong emotions come up in our life in a variety of situations. Now, we may not always, use the exact wording or, have as intense feelings that are present in the Psalm, but we all have situations in our life where, it's this, wanting justice or, wanting to get revenge on someone. And so we all have these, but instead, what we see in these Psalms, instead of staying in this anger or this place of hate and seeking revenge, instead what we find here is that the psalmist is turning towards God in this situation. They're turning towards God, much like what we saw in the laments, where they turn towards God in those very difficult situations. They're turning towards God and they're letting God have the final say. They're handing it over to God. And so for us, it's this idea of handing a situation over to God, letting God be in control of it, letting God be the judge. Not so much us seeking vengeance or getting revenge for a situation, but instead letting God have his revenge. And so through these Psalms, we can use these Psalms to express our emotions to God and let him have control, hand over the situation, and I think also in a way, hand over our emotions to God. And so letting God have the final say because he is the one who is ultimately in control. Also in these Psalms, the psalmist is viewed as the righteous one and the oppressor is the sinner. And so in these Psalms, we see that sin is a very serious thing and it's hateful to God. That the psalmist, the righteous one, is writing this and he's writing about how he's being oppressed and afflicted by the unrighteous or by the sinner. The one who is attacking him is sinning. And so the godly person should see that sin and it should almost anger us. And so I think these Psalms are a reminder to us that sin is to be taken serious. It's not some lighthearted thing that, we just let go, ignore it and figure, oh, they'll find their way, or, that's just them. But instead, we see here that sin is a very serious thing. We read these Psalms and you just get this idea that, these people that are attacking this individual, attacking the psalmist, they are also attacking God, basically. And this attacking God is not something that's to be taken lightly. Sinning against God is not something that's to be taken lightly. It's very serious. It's a very serious thing. And so what we see in these Psalms is this idea that sin is to be taken very serious. And I think that speaks for Christians as well today, that in the New Testament, we're told to love our enemies, but we're also to show love to the orphan, the widowed, or basically anyone who's being oppressed, or those who are weak, the minority. And so when they are being oppressed or taken advantage of, us as New Testament Christians, we shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. But sin should anger us like it does God, and like it angers these psalmists. And so that anger or frustration should drive us to action. Not so much action as seeking revenge, but seeking to help that person, to help the one who's being oppressed. And so as we read these Psalms, it should just be a reminder to us that about the seriousness of sin and how it affects God and how it impacts Him. And so let's look at the outline of these Psalms, and then we'll look at Psalm 109. Had to get some water. And so the outline, it starts with the invocation. Again, this crying out to God, this might see, "O Lord," or "O God." And then you have the lament, all right, which we talked about last week, is this idea of complaining about their situation, complaining before God. And with that lament, and also into the petition, is where we'll see actually the cursing language. And so there's the lament kind of talking about their situation, and then a petition to God to seek justice for their situation, and then praise. It closes out in praise. Remember, we said all of the Psalms are moving in this direction towards praise. That should be the end goal, is always to praise God in any situation. And I think that's what we see in the Psalms, that it's this idea of praising God in no matter what situation we're in, and that should be our life goal. And so, like I said, that outline, it's very similar to the lament outline. And so that makes sense because, like we said, many of the imprecatory Psalms are also considered lament Psalms. In fact, all of them are considered lament Psalms. And so let's look at Psalm 109. This is an imprecatory Psalm, and we'll read through it a couple times. I only have it on the slides in NIV, and so, but I will still read it out of the NIV, New American Standard, and also New Living Translation. And so I'll start with the NIV. My God, whom I praise, do not remain silent. For people who are wicked and deceitful have opened their mouths against me. They have spoken against me with lying tongues. With words of hatred they surround me. They attack me without cause. In return for my friendship they accuse me, but I am a man of prayer. They repay me evil for good and hatred for my friendship. Appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. May his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May a creditor seize all he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. May no one extend kindness to him or take pity on his fatherless children. May his descendants be cut off, their names blotted out from the next generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord. May the sin of his mother never be blotted out. May their sins always remain before the Lord, that he may blot out their name from the earth. For he never thought of doing a kindness, but hounded to death the poor and the needy and the brokenhearted. He loved to pronounce a curse. May it come back on him. He found no pleasure in blessing. May it be far from him. He wore cursing as his garment. It entered into his body like water, into his bones like oil. May it be like a cloak wrapped about him, like a belt tied forever around him. May this be the Lord's payment to my accusers, to those who speak evil of me. But you, sovereign Lord, help me for your name's sake. Out of the goodness of your love, deliver me, for I am poor and needy, and my heart is wounded within me. I fade away like an evening shadow. I am shaken off like a locust. My knees give way from fasting. My body is thin and gone. I am an object of scorn to my accusers. When they see me, they shake their heads. Help me, Lord my God. Save me according to your unfailing love. Let them know that it is your hand, that you, Lord, have done it. While they curse, may you bless. May those who attack me be put to shame, and may your servant rejoice. May my accusers be clothed with disgrace and wrapped in shame as in a cloak. With my mouth I will greatly extol the Lord, and the great throng of worshipers I will praise him. For he stands at the right hand of the needy, to save their lives from those who would condemn them. And then New American Standard. O God of my praise, do not be silent, for they have opened the wicked and deceitful mouth against me. For the wicked and deceitful mouth against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They have also surrounded me with words of hatred and fought against me without cause. In return for my love, they act as my accusers, but I am in prayer. Thus they have repaid me evil for good and hatred for my love. Appoint a wicked man over him, and let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is judged, let him come forth guilty, and let his prayer become sin. Let his days be few, let another take his office. Let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. Let his children wander about and beg. Let them seek sustenance far from their ruined homes. Let the creditor seize all that he has, and let strangers plunder the product of his labor. Let there be none to extend loving kindness to him, nor any to be gracious to his fatherless children. Let his posterity be cut off. In a following generation, let their names be blotted out. Let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and do not let the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off their memory from the earth. Because he did not remember to show loving kindness, but persecuted the afflicted and needy man, and the despondent in heart, to put them to death. He also loved cursing, so it came to him, and he did not delight in blessing, so it was far from him. But he clothed himself with cursing as with his garment, and it entered into his body like water, and like oil into his bones. Let it be to him as a garment with which he covers himself, and for a belt with which he constantly girds himself. Let this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, and of those who speak evil against my soul. But you, O God the Lord, deal kindly with me for your name's sake. Because your loving kindness is good, deliver me. For I am afflicted and needy, and my heart is wounded within me. I am passing like a shadow when it lengthens. I am shaken off like the locust. My knees are weak from fasting, and my flesh has grown lean without fatness. I also have become a reproach to them. When they see me, they wag their head. Help me, O Lord my God, save me according to your loving kindness, and let them know that this is your hand. You, Lord, have done it. Let them curse, but you bless. When they arise, they shall be ashamed, but your servant shall be glad. Let my accusers be clothed with dishonor, and let them cover themselves with their own shame as with a robe. With my mouth I will give thanks abundantly to the Lord, and in the midst of many I will praise him, for he stands at the right hand of the needy to save him from those who judge his soul. And then New Living Translation. O God, whom I praise, don't stand silent and aloof, while the wicked slander me and tell lies about me. They are all around me with their hateful words, and they fight against me for no reason. I love them, but they try to destroy me, even as I am praying for them. They return evil for good and hatred for my love. Arrange for an evil person to turn on him. Send an accuser to bring him to trial. When his case is called for judgment, let him be pronounced guilty. Count his prayers as sins. Let his years be few. Let his position be given to someone else. May his children become fatherless, and may his wife become a widow. May his children wander as beggars. May they be evicted from their ruined homes. May creditors seize his entire estate, and strangers take all he has earned. Let no one be kind to him. Let no one pity his fatherless children. May all his offspring die. May his family name be blotted out in a single generation. May the Lord never forget the sins of his ancestors. May his mother's sins never be erased from the record. May these sins always remain before the Lord, but may his name be cut off from human memory. For he refused all kindness to others. He persecuted the poor and needy, and he hounded the brokenhearted to death. He loved to curse others. Now you curse him. He never blessed others. Now don't you bless him. Cursing is as much a part of him as his clothing, or as the water he drinks, or the rich food he eats. Now may his curses return and cling to him like clothing. May they be tied around him like a belt. May those curses become the Lord's punishment for my accusers, who are plotting against my life. But deal well with me, O sovereign Lord, for the sake of your own reputation. Rescue me, because you are so faithful and good, for I am poor and needy, and my heart is full of pain. I am fading like a shadow at dusk. I am falling like a grasshopper that is brushed aside. My knees are weak from fasting, and I am skin and bones. I am an object of mockery to people everywhere. When they see me, they shake their heads. Help me, O Lord my God. Save me because of your unfailing love. Let them see that this is your doing, that you yourself have done it, Lord. Then let them curse me if they like, but you will bless me. When they attack me, they will be disgraced, but I, your servant, will go right on rejoicing. Make their humiliation obvious to all. Clothe my accusers with disgrace. But I will give repeated thanks to the Lord, praising him to everyone. For he stands beside the needy, ready to save them from those who condemn them. And so as we read that, just the language in there, you see that cursing language. It's very intense and it's very strong. And we're going to look at some of it here in a sec. And then also, you have this huge contrast. You've got verses 6 through 20, which is the psalmist or the author calling down these curses upon his accusers. You've got that they've done all this evil. They've taken advantage of the poor and the needy. They've oppressed the weak. And so, they have lived a life of sin. But then starting in verse 21 to 31, you have this huge contrast to the psalmist. The psalmist is contrasted to the oppressor. The psalmist is this person that's very righteous. They are near to God. They are close to God. They do what is right. And so in verses 6 through 20, you have a call for judgment on the wicked. Just to read through some of these, it says, appoint an evil man to oppose him. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty. So already it's this whole idea of this judgment scene, that they will be found guilty. Now we as New Testament Christians, we recognize that and can apply that as this judgment scene. But it goes on, it says, may his children be wandering beggars. It says, may his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May a creditor seize all he has. And it talks about basically his name being wiped from the memory books. And so may no one ever remember him. May not have any kind of legacy at all. May his whole family be just destroyed. May them be poor, sent out on the streets to defend for themselves. It's very strong language you just read this and, we have this person, the psalmist, who's being accused or facing some kind of trying situation by this person. And that, like we said, that raw, authentic emotion is just coming out. That they're just frustrated and they're showing that frustration, that anger towards this person. But despite that anger, it's still letting God have control of the situation, letting God be in control. And so, it's not easy to acknowledge these thoughts. It's not easy to acknowledge these verses, but at the same time, we are to show love to our enemies. But what we do see in the psalm, like I said, is the main purpose, and it's this turning towards God. Giving God praise in the hard times, letting him be in control. Because the psalm closes out and says, with my heart I will greatly extol the Lord. In the great throng I will praise him. For he stands at the right hand of the needy one, to save his life from those who condemn him. And so it's like what we talked about last week with the laments, that the psalmist is in this very dark situation. They're crying out to God for help, but they are still turning towards God. They're giving praise to God, and they're letting God have control of this situation. And I think you could have a lot of, I wish I was here for this lesson, because I think we could have a lot of good discussion possibly about this idea of vengeance and seeking justice, but at the same time showing love to them and letting God be in control. And I think it's a very difficult thing for Christians sometimes to kind of reconcile the two, that this idea of justice but also seeking love for your enemies. And it's not always clear lines of, okay, this is how you give justice in this situation or in this, and there's no blanket statements for all of this. I think it's very unique, and it also depends on the individual as well and kind of where they are in that situation. Kind of like what we talked about last week with the laments. We can't look at someone's situation and say, oh, they need to react this way, or they need to be doing this instead, or they should do this. Instead, we should encourage them and acknowledge their emotions and help them, perhaps gently help them move in this direction of praise, because that, I think, should be the end goal. Not getting an eye for an eye, not even really us seeking justice, but instead it's this trusting God and giving praise to God in those situations. One psalm I want us to close with, and I don't have it on the slide here, and so if you have your Bibles, you just have to turn there. We're just going to read it through. I'm just going to read it out of the NIV, just one time for time's sake. It's Psalm 137, and this is a psalm that it's written by an exiled Israel, and so they have been removed from Jerusalem. They've been taken to Babylon. And so they have seen Jerusalem destroyed, this place that was their city of David, the land that God gave them, this land that represented a relationship between them and God. They've been kicked out. And the temple that represented God's presence on earth has been destroyed. And they, just imagine the Jews or the Israelites as they're leaving Jerusalem, they're being exiled out, taken out to Babylon, and they're looking back and possibly seeing the temple being destroyed, seeing people take it apart stone by stone. And I mean, just the sorrow that is there is, I don't think we can quite fully understand, but I hope you can understand this idea of this relationship being destroyed. And so Psalm 137 is a psalm that's in response to that. It says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion," or we sat and wept when we remembered Jerusalem. "There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.'" So they're making fun of them. They're saying, "Sing us one of the songs of your people." And the psalmist says, "How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down," they cried, "tear it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us, he who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." This is one of those lament imprecatory psalms, and you read that and you think, wow. I mean, just the emotion there is so raw and authentic. I mean, you just see them in this very dark situation, and they're saying, "Happy or blessed is the one who throws your kids against the rocks." I mean, just if you were to think of that image, I mean, it is not one. I mean, no normal person would find joy in that situation. But here they are, and it's that whole idea that maybe it's possibly a hyperbole or exaggeration. But what we see here is that real, authentic emotion, that they are in this dark time. And I think it's easy for us when we read that psalm to focus on that part because it's the extreme. And it closes out in that extreme. But I want us to close by going back to verse 5. It says, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." It's this idea that I don't want to forget Jerusalem, or I don't want to forget about you, Lord. I don't want to forget about that relationship. That is the most important thing to me, that if I forget that, I don't want anything else in life. And so what we see here, like I said, it's easy for us to get caught up on verses 8 and 9 because they're so intense, but really I think the main focus of this is verses 5 and 6. It says, "May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy." So what we learn from this psalm is that it's this idea of being committed to God even in the dark times. Like we've been saying, that even in those difficult times, crying out to God, seeking God for help, and praising Him in those difficult times. Well, I know we weren't able to necessarily discuss these psalms like I would have wanted us to, but since I was out of town, we had to do the video. But next week, I'll spend a little extra time kind of talking about these psalms and kind of combining them with the laments, and we can we'll spend a little time discussing them, kind of sharing your thoughts, kind of help wrap up the laments and imprecatory psalms. And so if you have any questions or comments, like I said, put them in the yellow box that's up here. I'll get to those the following week. And so thank you and have a good week. You're dismissed.